Paris, 1788. A man sits alone at a small table. It's past midnight. The city outside is starving. He can hear them down in the street. Tens of thousands of people who haven't eaten in 3 days. He picks up his pen. He doesn't think of himself as dangerous. He's just a pamphlet writer, a journalist, 30 years old, mostly unemployed, thrown out of 2 jobs already for saying the wrong things to the wrong people. His name is Camille Desmoulins, and in the next 12 months, the words he writes at this table will help ignite the most consequential social revolution in modern history. Not a king, not a general, not a philosopher with a university position, a broke writer in a cold apartment. This is what history doesn't tell you. We hear about the storming of the Bastille. We hear about Marie Antoinette and her cakes. We hear about Napoleon rising from the chaos. But we almost never hear about the specific moments when ordinary people made small decisions. And those decisions changed everything, because that's how revolutions actually start. Not with armies, not with declarations, with whispers. To understand what happened next, you need to feel what France felt like in 1788. Not just understand it. Feel it. Imagine roughly 28 million people. Most of them are peasants. They work land they don't own. They pay taxes to a church they're losing faith in. They pay rent to nobles who haven't done a day of physical labor in 3 generations. And then the harvest fails, not just once. 2 years in a row, bread prices double, then triple. In some regions, a family's entire weekly income barely covers 1 loaf. Meanwhile, the king, Louis XVI, is genuinely trying to fix it. That part gets lost in the drama. He wasn't a monster. He was a cautious, well-meaning man who was simply not built for the moment he was born into. He keeps calling the Estates General, then disbanding them, then calling them again. The Estates General is basically the French Parliament, except it hasn't met in over 170 years. Nobody alive knows how it works anymore. There are 3 groups called estates: the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else. That 3rd group, the 3rd estate, represents about 97% of the population. But in voting, each group gets exactly 1 vote, so 2% of France can always outvote the other 98. Every single time. The 3rd estate delegates arrive in Versailles in May 1789, furious and exhausted. They've traveled weeks. Their shoes are worn through. They're carrying tens of thousands of grievance letters from towns and villages across France, called cahiers de doléances. Real letters, real handwriting, from real people who wanted their lives to change. A miller in Normandy, a seamstress in Lyon, a dockworker in Marseille. They weren't asking for revolution. Not yet. They were asking for fairness. The king refuses to let the 3rd estate meet in the main hall. He locks the doors, so they go somewhere else. A tennis court. In a cold, empty sports hall, 600 men swear an oath not to go home until France has a real constitution. That is the tennis court oath, June 1789. Most history books mention it. What they don't mention is what it felt like to be in that room. These weren't radicals. Most of them were lawyers, doctors, minor officials, respectable men who had everything to lose. They took the oath anyway. That is when the whisper becomes a shout. Back to Camille Desmoulins. By July 1789, the crisis has been simmering for weeks. The king fires his reform-minded finance minister, Jacques Necker, the one man the people of Paris actually trusted. The news hits Paris on a Sunday afternoon. Within hours, the city is on the edge of something. Desmoulins is in the Palais Royal Gardens. It's a public square, part marketplace, part coffee house, part political salon. It's the Twitter of 1789, the place where information spreads in real time. He hears the news about Necker. He jumps up on a table. Now. Here's what most people don't know about Camille Desmoulins. He stuttered his whole life, a terrible stutter that had humiliated him since childhood, made him quit school, made him avoid public speaking entirely. In this moment, standing on a cafe table in front of hundreds of strangers, it disappears. He speaks for 20 minutes. No notes, no preparation. He tells the crowd that troops are massing outside Paris, that the king is about to massacre them, that this is their last moment to act. He grabs a leaf from a tree above him. "This is our cockade," he shouts, "the green ribbon, the color of hope." Within 2 days, that crowd, plus thousands of others it inspired, storms the Bastille. Now, was everything Desmoulins said true? Not exactly. The troops were real. The fear was real. But the massacre he described was his own terrified interpretation of events. And yet, the emotion was completely true. The people of Paris weren't just reacting to one speech. They were ready. They'd been ready for years. Desmoulins was the match. The gunpowder had been accumulating for a century. This is the part that matters. Revolutions don't get created by charismatic speakers. But charismatic speakers can name what people already feel. That's a different kind of power, and it's far more dangerous. 3 months after the Bastille falls, the revolution nearly collapses before it even starts. Bread prices are still brutal, the reforms are slow, and the king, now formally a constitutional monarch, keeps stalling. Then the women of Paris decide they've had enough. October 5th, 1789. It starts in a market. A market woman named, well, we don't actually know her name. History didn't record it. She's just described as a woman in a green dress. She starts beating a drum, other women gather, then more, then thousands. They march 7 leagues to Versailles. In the rain, carrying pikes, kitchen knives, and cannons they dragged by hand through the mud. They demand to see the king. Louis XVI, incredibly, agrees to meet them. He promises grain, he promises lower bread prices, and then, and this is the crucial part, they refuse to leave. They camp in the palace courtyard overnight, soaking wet, exhausted, refusing to go. In the morning, they break into the palace. They kill 2 of the king's guards. They demand the king and queen return with them to Paris. And, shockingly, the king agrees. The royal family climbs into their carriage, and the women march them home. Through the rain, through the cheering crowds, back to the Tuileries Palace in Paris. The king never returns to Versailles. From that moment on, he is essentially a prisoner in his own capital. What do you call that? Not a battle, not a political maneuver. A group of market women dragged the King of France from his palace with their bare hands. History calls it the Women's March on Versailles. It gets half a paragraph in most textbooks. But here's what it actually was. It was proof that the revolution didn't belong to lawyers and pamphleteers. It belonged to everyone who was hungry enough to move. The revolution starts with justice as its language. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, brotherhood. Those are beautiful words, but revolutions are not beautiful things. Within 4 years, the men who helped tear down the old world are tearing down each other. This is the part of the story that's deeply uncomfortable. Maximilien Robespierre. He's one of the great, tragic figures in the history of political thought. In 1789, he's a 30-year-old lawyer from a small provincial town. He dresses neatly. He speaks carefully. He never raises his voice. He believes, completely and sincerely, in the ideals of the revolution. Equal rights, no aristocracy, government for the people. He also becomes the architect of the Terror. The Terror, 1793 to 1794. Roughly 17,000 people are officially executed, mostly by guillotine. Many more die in prison or in the civil wars the revolution sets off. Not just aristocrats, priests, merchants, moderate revolutionaries. People who celebrated too early. People who complained too loudly. people who were simply reported by a neighbor with a grudge. Robespierre doesn't see himself as a murderer. He sees himself as a doctor performing emergency surgery on a diseased society. He calls it the despotism of liberty against tyranny. Think about that phrase for a moment. The despotism of liberty. It's not cynical. It's not propaganda. He actually believes it. That is what makes him terrifying. And here's the thing about Robespierre that gets forgotten. He was right about almost everything he diagnosed. The inequality was real. The corruption was real. The foreign threats to the revolution were real. The counter-revolutionary networks were real. His diagnosis was accurate. His treatment killed more people than the disease. This is a pattern you'll see over and over in history, not just in France. In Russia in 1917, in China in 1949, in Iran in 1979. The person who burns down the old structure is rarely the right person to build the new one. Robespierre is arrested in July 1794. He tries to shoot himself in the jaw the night before his execution. He survives. Barely. He's guillotined the next morning. The crowd cheers. While all of this is happening, the marches, the executions, the chaos, a young artillery officer is paying close attention. He's 20 years old in 1789. He's watching everything. He's not French, technically. He's from Corsica. His first language is Italian. His French still carries an accent. His name, spelled the Italian way, is Napoleon di Buonaparte. Napoleon isn't a product of the revolution in the way most people assume. He doesn't believe in the revolution's ideals the way Robespierre did. He's not an idealist. He's something colder and more practical. He looks at the chaos of the 1790s and sees a problem that needs solving. He looks at the disorder of French politics. Government after government collapsing, 5 years of instability, and he sees an opening. He is, in the most honest possible terms, a deeply gifted opportunist who happened to be standing next to a power vacuum. But here's where the story becomes strange. The values of the revolution, equality before the law, abolition of feudalism, property rights, religious tolerance, Napoleon actually exports these across Europe. Not because he believes in them, but because they're useful. Conquered territories with French legal codes are easier to govern. A population that isn't legally enslaved produces more soldiers and more taxes. Napoleon is the revolution's most effective salesman, and he doesn't believe a word of it. By 1815, when he's finally defeated and exiled to St. Helena, the map of Europe has been redrawn. Dozens of ancient kingdoms are gone. The feudal system is functionally dead across most of the continent. The world that existed in 1788, the world Camille Desmoulins stared at from his cold apartment window, is simply gone. Here's the question that doesn't get asked enough. What did they actually want? The people in the streets, the women dragging cannons through the rain, the pamphleteers and the market sellers and the farmers who sent their grievance letters to Versailles. Not the philosophers, not the politicians, the actual people. They wanted to eat. They wanted to not be taxed into poverty by people who contributed nothing. They wanted to matter. That's it. The ideas, liberty, equality, rights of man, those came later. Those were the language-educated men gave to something much simpler and much more urgent. A collective decision made by millions of people in parallel that the deal they'd been born into was not acceptable anymore. That's what a revolution actually is. Not a theory, not a speech. A line that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. Camille Desmoulins, by the way, does not survive the revolution he helped start. Robespierre has him arrested in 1794. He's 33 years old. He writes to his wife from prison every night. Her name is Lucille. They've been married 4 years. They have a 1-year-old son. His letters are extraordinary, tender, frightened, fiercely alive. They execute him in April. Lucille follows him to the guillotine a week later. Their son grows up to be a minor government official. He never speaks publicly about his parents. History remembers the storming of the Bastille. History remembers Napoleon. It almost forgot the man who stood on a cafe table, grabbed a leaf from a tree, and told a crowd of strangers what they were already feeling. But without that whisper, none of it happens the way it did.